What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Diesel Creek. My name's Matt. This big bad boy right here is the counter shaft out of my pull behind vibratory roller, which you guys haven't seen in a little bit. This is the second video on this machine. Now, if you haven't seen the first one, the link is down in the description. That'll probably make a whole lot more of this make sense. So if you haven't seen that, check that out first. Just in case you're stubborn and didn't listen to me and you have no idea what's going on here, this big counter shaft right here was snapped in half the last time you guys saw it. So this counter shaft is what makes the roller do the vibration and really compact the dirt. So the last time you guys saw it, it looked like this. This is the old piece off of the shaft here. They basically machined me a brand new one, cut this thing down, stubbed them together, welded it up, and remachined the whole thing. And $1,200 later, we have a good shaft for the roller here. So today we're going to get started on putting this thing back together. Today for you guys, probably not today for me. Also, just in case you guys don't think I read the comments, the last video, as I drove away at the end of the video, I had this shaft strapped down back here like this, and there were some people that took issue with the way I had this strapped down. They said it was going to come loose and roll all over the place. This shaft probably weighs about 800 pounds, I'm guessing. It's pretty darn heavy. Shaking the whole truck, that shaft doesn't move. Alrighty, well, I brought everything over here onto the pad, so I have some nice dry area to work in the upcoming rain events that Pennsylvania likes to keep throwing at me. Never to be deterred, I'm going to put this thing back together here relatively quickly, I hope. The last thing I have to do is disassemble this clutch here, and I don't know why I didn't do this sooner. The bearings should be easy to source. I should be able to get them next day, so we'll have to get this thing apart. Now, you guys will be able to see some slop in this thing. You guys see that bit of slop there? That means those bearings are bad in the clutch. This bit of slop means that the bearings are very, very, very bad in this bearing housing down here that this whole shaft spins in. So this thing has been virtually run into the ground. Well, literally it does get run into the ground. It's a roller, but Yeah, it's not good. I hope that housing isn't messed up. If that's messed up, that's going to cause problems. So, well, I'm going to try to pull this clutch off the shaft here. Now, it does have 2 bolt holes specifically for a puller to pull that thing off of there, but I don't have the right size bolts with me. So I'm going to try it first with my homemade puller here. Seen that coming. Boy, I'm not loving that. Something's gonna happen here. I don't want hit by a flying puller. Need a bigger hammer. Don't force it. Get a bigger hammer. I don't think it moved though. Well, I think we're about done here until we find proper bolts for this thing. It's just bending the little ears on my puller here. Well, I reckon I might as well just go to town later and buy myself some lottery tickets, because trying to save myself a trip to town, I went over to that old service van that I bought a few videos back, if you guys remember, and there's a drawer in that service van that just has random nuts and bolts in it. And I thought, the odds of me finding what I need are absolutely zero. Lo and behold, not only did I find the bolts that I needed, there was 3 of them. I have an extra. Crazy. So, count my lucky stars for that one, and hopefully we can pull this thing off of here now. Farm isn't really that far away from town, but man, is it sure a pain in the butt every time you gotta need something stupid like a bolt and you gotta run to town for it. It really kills your day. What do you guys think? Is it actually going to come off of here this time? I don't know, I had quite a bit of pressure before and nothing happened. You got to take your time when you're using pullers like this, and you got to make sure, you know, because we're doing this all with washers and everything. Everything has to be lined up. You know, the things are off center right now with the puller, so you just put a little bit of tension. Spend a couple minutes tapping things around, really even them out. That even pressure does a lot more for you than pulling a little crooked or something. Pulling crooked can actually make it a lot harder. Well, I think I got everything about as even as I can get it. Go ahead and put some pressure on this thing. That's some pressure. Nothing's happening. Thing's still looking pretty even though, that's good. Oh man. Yeah. Once you get a lot of pressure on something like this, you're going to want to go ahead and rap that with a hammer a few times, and what that does is drive a shock load into the shaft there and can help dislodge this thing. Oh, something happened. Something happened. Oh yeah, she's coming now. Oh man, I do not like that. There is a lot of pressure on this thing right now. A lot of pressure. Something jumped. There we go. I see shiny metal on the backside. We're moving it. Uh-oh. Now, for those of you that have dove into my backstory a little bit, I used to work in a machine shop, and we did a lot of stuff like this every day. And it's not too common when you see a bearing just disintegrate like that rather than slide off the shaft. So we did something here. I don't know if it's good or bad yet, but we're doing something. Ooh, we also we deformed the whole back of this clutch housing. I hope we're not gutting this clutch as we go here. We're gonna be in big trouble if that's what we did. Well, we're already this far, you might as well just finish the job. Right. Well, good news, the shaft seems to be okay. Bad news is I see why we broke this thing. It's got this keyway in here that would not let that bearing come with it, and it appears as though we probably should have taken this back plate off of this clutch housing first. I assumed it came off as a whole assembly, and you know what they say about assuming. I'm not worried about the bearing. The bearing needed replaced anyways. I am, however, concerned about the damage we may have done to whatever is inside this clutch housing. Well, really hope I didn't tear up anything in there. If it's just this cover being bent, I can just put it in the press and bend it back down. Hope that's all it is. So, this bearing's toasted, obviously. I actually even put so much pressure on that keyway trying to draw that off of there that it kind of bulged up the end of the keyway there. It's kind of got a big knob on it now. I'm gonna have to grind back flat. And I think if I take this drive yoke off the other side, this whole shaft is just gonna slide right out of there. That's good that it's not gonna be a lot of work, but it's bad because with that much slop in there, yeah, I can see it. And that means the fits inside of here are wallered out, and they're not gonna hold bearings tight anymore. So it's not ideal, but I have a trick for that I'll show you guys. Oh, there's that greasy mess. Ugh. Now, the worst news of all is the reason for the slop. The bearing here has completely destroyed the shaft. You'll be able to see it better once I take the bearing off of there, but it's really Oh, there you go. The whole thing's sliding apart. It ate that whole surface out. It's supposed to be that size, and it's now that size. So that's a problem. So there's our shaft. Obviously this is the bearing I destroyed, and this one is the one that spun. Bearings don't usually have that loose of a fit. It was free for a reason, folks. Be leery of free. Even oh man, that's some good carnage. Looks to me like 100% of that is wear. Like the shaft is supposed to be this diameter straight through. Now I have to confirm that when I check with the caliper, but I'm 99% sure. That's bad. What happens and what causes that is a bearing, if it gets really dry, and they'll heat up and they'll actually lock up. And then whichever fit is looser, whether it's the inner one or the outer one, it'll start bringing the bearing along for the ride and spinning it in the housing or on the shaft. And it looks like we might have had a little bit of both on this project here. So the cover being tweaked might be doing that as I pull them out. I think it's rounding the threads. I don't think the threaded, whatever they're threaded into is the problem. I have no idea what's inside of here or how this clutch works. Hopefully there's no springs that are gonna come flying out. Doesn't appear to be. Oh. Well, the good news is, yes, I can press this plate back flat. Bad news is I did curve it up pretty good, and I'm not sure if you guys can tell. I definitely didn't do it any favors. So we've got a spider and some friction weights in here. Okay. Right. So definitely needs cleaned up. Well, I'm about ready to do the welding repair here now to this shaft. Actually, after cleaning it up, you can see the bearing for the clutch was also spinning at one point. It has this shaft worn down here, so it's worn down pretty darn bad there. So it's going to take 1 or 2 passes of weld over that, and then we'll probably take one more pass over from there, clear over to here, and then we'll come back through and clean that all up. And it's all supposed to be 1 diameter. So yeah, fire up the welder and get to burning some rods here. Now I'm gonna try it just because we're already here and it would be super convenient if it worked out. I've got the lathe in the slowest gear, and hopefully I can get this thing to turn slow enough where I can just zzz and weld while this thing keeps spinning, and I can just work my way right across. I'm pretty sure it's not gonna turn slow enough for us, but we're gonna give it a try. You guys think it's gonna work? Here we go. Working pretty good. The great thing about having this rotate as I weld it, rather than welding across, rotate, is that it reduces the risk of warping this shaft, because we are putting a lot of heat in there, and if we did it unevenly, it could cause the shaft to warp. There we go. Now it's not real pretty, but it doesn't really need to be. The point is that it's built up higher than it needs to be turned down to, so I think we should be good there, and I can go ahead and set up and start cutting away at this thing. What do you guys think about that? According to the caliper, we're right on the money. So, probably gonna check it with the bearing first before I call it officially good. But it should be like a 1/1000th interference fit probably. Well, I think we finally have all the pieces to the puzzle here, so we can go ahead and start trying to put this thing together. Yesterday I went through and completely washed out all the important surfaces. These are actually big bearing races here, and the shaft runs through this hole, obviously, if you remember from the last video, and had those big holders here with the single ball bearing that runs around in that race. Now what I think that's supposed to do is keep all the force from the shaft actually pushing into the drum rather than getting pushed onto the bearings that run the drum on the shaft. Anyway, I think that's the thought behind it. This side doesn't look too bad. There is a teeny little bit of pitting here, but for as massive as those ball bearings are that ride in there, I don't think that's too much of an issue. This side, however, is a far sight worse. You can see this is very, very pitted. There's very little of this nice smooth surface left to this side. So, yeah, I'm not a fan of that, but man, the cost to replace that is going to be astronomical. I didn't look it up, but anytime you get into bearings remotely this big, it's big money. So, yeah, these actually have an SKF number. I do have the parts manual for this thing. So these are just a regular old bearing race and a single ball that happens to go in them. So these are the two balls that ride in those races over there. This one here, as you can see, pretty well pitted up and has one scarred up spot right here. Of course you can't see it. This one here, as you can see, is pretty well pitted up, and it actually has a scarring spot right there, so that's not going to ride real nice. But yeah, as I said, I probably already have too much money into this unit, more than it's worth, so I'm not going to replace those. They just have to work. This isn't going to be a unit that I run a ton, and if it becomes something that I use a lot, then maybe I'll replace them, but until that time comes, they're gonna go back together as it is. I cleaned up all the parts real good yesterday. The other thing I did off camera here is I went through and completely disassembled these roller bearings. I took all the rollers out of them, cleaned them up really good. The cages and bearings and races were all filthy and had all kind of grit and stuff that had gotten worked into them since we took it apart out here in the dirt. So I cleaned those up really good. There was some pitting on these rollers as well, but again, prohibitively expensive bearings. I bet you these are $300–400 a piece, and yeah, I'm just not willing to put that money into it right now. I think that these bearings will probably run for a fair amount of time before they ever have any catastrophic failures. They probably won't be super quiet when they're running, but that's okay. If it ever comes to a time when we need to replace these things, if this unit seems to be worth it, if it has a good compaction rate, if the shaft holds up and doesn't snap again, then maybe we'll do it. But right now, this just has to work. As you may recall from the last video, it was kind of difficult to get this shaft pulled out of the drum. The whole thing was covered in grease, and trying to really just grab a hold of that thing and pull was tough, so I ended up having to clamp on it with a strap and pull it out. So to pull it through, I actually did a little bit of thinking before I came out here today. I grabbed an eye bolt, threaded it into the shaft here. Now I should be able to put a shackle and another strap on this thing and chase that through there first, and I'll start the shaft in with the machine, and then I can pull it the rest of the way through with the strap and the eye bolt there. Now you'd think I could have done a little bit better job throwing that strap in here, huh? Ta-da! Oh yeah. My poor strap. What a mess. What a mess. There we go. Woo! The struggle. There we go. Whew. That sucker is heavy. I've talked about it before. People always complimenting me in the comments of these videos about how it's amazing how you remember where everything goes back together. Well, I'm here to tell you, I don't necessarily live up to that all the time. I am pretty good about it, but in my haste to disassemble things, sometimes I get pretty excited and I just remove stuff and toss them onto a skid or wherever, and I don't think about marking things that are duplicates. So there's two of these bearing plates here that go on the sides of the drums. Now, without sitting here and studying and measuring and everything, I'm not positive that they're both identical, although they visibly appear to be, but that is not always the case. So I could sit here and measure these things for 20 minutes and make sure that both sides are the same and one isn't specific to one side or the other. But luckily enough for me, when the neighbor gave me this compactor, he gave me a limited, albeit very helpful, packet of diagrams here. And we can see clearly in the diagram that this bearing plate on the right side is number 429, and the bearing plate up here on the left side is also number 429. So that means that the part numbers are the same. That means they are interchangeable, and we don't have to worry about anything. This diagram is also extremely helpful because these things right here, these taper lock bearings, they have like this taper lock that goes through the bearing. The inner race of that bearing is actually tapered to match that threaded lock. And I've done quite a bit of heavy industrial stuff with shafts and bearings and that kind of thing, and I've never actually seen one of those, so pretty neat. And I'm glad I have a diagram to make sure I don't screw it up. I'm also just realizing that if I'd have bothered to pay attention to this diagram before I took that clutch apart, I would have saved myself the grief of bending up that bearing plate. Arrgh. Times like this, you gotta step back and say, why am I working so hard? If I was smart, I'd jam a screwdriver into this split, spread that thing, and it'll slide right on there. You gotta use your noodle. This should make things just a bit easier. A lot more like tapping it on now rather than driving it on. All right, tighten that down, install the ball, and do the other side. Oh, there we go. These things get a lot of pressure on them, so best to make sure they are Guten tight, according to the German spec. Another reason I'm really glad that I have the drawings here today is that these pieces right here I'm installing now could go on either way. They are capable of being reversed, meaning that this side would be over here and vice versa. I was not sure which way they should go until I looked at the print. So I would have been either looking at the prints, or in my case going back in the video and watching how I disassembled it, hoping that whoever had it apart previous to me even had it correct. So good to have prints. Once I was able to see on the print that this is the way it went, the orientation does make sense to me, because this part drives that ball around and this part really just keeps it in between these things. So this is the direction the shaft turns, counterclockwise from where you guys are sitting. But yeah, makes sense. Can't forget to install your ball. Do somebody a favor. If you're installing bearings, always install them with the identification numbers out if possible, because the next guy that you save could be you. I always hate when I have to completely disassemble something just to get a bearing number. There we go. Here's another unique piece to this roller. I've never seen anything quite like it. It's a split flange here. You put the flange on, you put this locking ring over top of that sticks them together, and then we got a big C-clip that goes on there and holds the whole thing in place. And I forgot we had to put this part on here today, so I did not bring any C-clip pliers. Got the one end started finally. Just try to work it around with the screwdriver here. There we go. Always give her a nice little tap, make sure it's seated in there. And it's a good thing I did, because it wasn't. Guten tight. Shouldn't matter which way this cap goes on. I'm just trying to get all the grease fittings near each other down here, so that when you spin the drum and you can hit one fitting, you see the other one at least. Now, clearly this is supposed to be some sort of a seal right here, and it's pretty well torn up. So, not much I can do about it right now. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a replacement for it, though I did look. I did find out just recently that the company that made this, Vibro Plus, they were sold to Dynapack, I think I was told. So, I'm gonna try calling a Dynapack dealer, and you know, like I've been saying all along here, we're gonna put this thing back together, and if it does what it's supposed to and it works good, then I'll consider putting some more money into it. But as it is right now, I've already got more than this thing is worth into it. You know that pit of your stomach feeling you get when you find a part and you're like, where does that little bugger go? After studying the prints, I've determined that this little bugger right here that I didn't see goes all the way in, back behind the main bearing in this plate right here. So now I have to take off the seal ring, the snap ring, the 2-part flange, the whole bearing plate again, just to slide this little bugger on and stick it all right back together. I'm not going to show you guys that because, well, it's repetitive A, and B, I'm going to be cursing. It's all part of the game. All right, well, I got the spacer ring in there. It wasn't too bad of a job. It's just frustrating when you put something together and have to take it all back apart. But anywho, now that the bearing chocks are on the end of the shaft here, you can see there's some wiggle room here. There's a taper lock inside of this bearing, and we're going to use this nut to cinch it down wherever we need to locate it at. But I don't know the location for sure until I put it back in the frame. So that's going to determine where we engage this thing at and lock it on. So we're going to loosely put this thing together. This is a lock ring for the AN nut. I think I said in the last video too that I was always taught these are called AN nuts, and somebody didn't like that, but that's what I was taught. I even brought the proper spanner with me today to put the thing back on. Well, I hung this thing on the shaft, and about that time I looked up and the camera wasn't blinking, so you guys missed it, but it wasn't very eventful, just like the other side. Also, just like the other side, this side does appear that we have a little bit of movement to it. We can kind of adjust where the drum sits in the frame by adjusting where these bearings clamp on at. So we're going to loosely put the nuts on this side as well, and then we'll drop the frame back down over this thing and have to adjust from there. Well, we got these bearing chocks cribbed up here so that they can't go anywhere on us when we set the frame down over. It's going to be a fun task to do by myself, but I always find a way. So let's fire up the excavator here and try and set this thing down on there. I kind of set myself up for failure there. Maybe not a failure, but at least a tougher time. I should have had the machine set up where I could just pick this frame up and walk straight backwards with it instead of having to go on an angle like I did, because now I'm running all the functions of the machine in every plane that we can. versus I would have been all in one straight plane if I'd done it the other way. But anything to test your skills a bit, huh? This side's looking good. Over here we're not too bad either. There we go. I think she's going to drop right down. Well, I think that went pretty darn good there. One thing I didn't think about is cribbing up with the bearing chocks like we did there. I wasn't able to get this thing to drop all the way down because the frame actually started sitting on the cribbing, as you can see. So yeah, I'm gonna have to figure that out here. Same thing on this side. It's a bit closer. I wonder, I think I can just stick the fork of the skid steer underneath the bearing chock and lift it up and then throw the bolts in. Do that on both sides and we're done. Boy, it's nice having the old Cabelco around here. This machine was definitely bigger than what I was looking for when I bought it, but man, it has come in super handy since I've had it. Spring didn't go into the pocket on this side. There we go. Well, now that the frame is set down on here, we can see our gap between the frame and the drum over here. We're probably about 1 3/4 inches or something. But then over on this side, you can see our gap is like less than 1/8 of an inch. So that means we need to slide the frame this way, kind of just get it centered up there. With the bearing chocks now being clamped onto the frame rails, that keeps them true, and that should slide the bearings right out to where we need to go. I'm gonna bet that this guy just sits right about the end of the shaft there, and that's about where it's happy, and we split the difference. Well, swallowed my pride, got a tape measure out here, and was able to just pry it around with a bar. Actually, the Cabelco might have been just a bit overkill. But we got 11/16 on each side of the drum, and we're ready to clamp this thing down. Now that we got the bearings where we want them, we just tighten this nut down, and that'll clamp the bearing onto the shaft. We'll bend over a locking tab, and then we can put our bearing cover on here. They make special sockets that run these nuts on and off that have little fingers that engage all these flat spots. I don't have any of those sockets, plus whoever had this apart last time didn't have those sockets either, because they did it the same way I'm doing it, which mangles up those flat areas. So even if I had the proper socket, it wouldn't work. Hopefully you guys can see this. There's that locking tab right there. Just bend that over and engage it in the slot there. I know it's pretty greasy. Hopefully you can tell what I'm doing there. And there we go. She's locked in, can't go anywhere. Well, I think with that on there, I am done with the drum aspect of this build. And I'm glad, because this thing was a greasy disaster. I don't think Eve is going to be able to get these clothes clean. Ruh-roh. Did they not cut the threads deep enough? It would appear they did not. Dang it. Well, they made the shaft right except for that. Basically all I'm going to have to do is get some washers and shim this thing out, because it's not, or a shorter bolt would be ideal, but this is the one I got, so I could probably scrounge up some washers and make this thing happy. There we go. Now that sucker's tight. Look at that too. Never been able to do that before. You guys remember when we disassembled this thing? Because that shaft was broken, this pulley was kicked on an angle and jammed right into our bearing chocks here. That looks a lot better. Well guys, I hate to leave you on a cliffhanger here, but I'm gonna part the video off here. I think it's probably getting pretty long. And the videos as of late on the channel have been getting pretty darn long. It takes me an awful long time to edit an hour-long video. I probably end up with 7 or 8 hours worth of editing involved. So I gotta cut these things down. It's killing me. So anyway, I hope you guys liked the video. If you did, smash the thumbs up button for me. It really helps out the channel. Lets me know I'm on the right track and working on stuff that you guys like. If you're not already, be sure also subscribe so you can catch the next episode of this roller. Hopefully that'll be the last episode on this roller, and we'll be putting it back into service and trying it out. Until the next time, guys, thanks for watching. I'll catch you later.